Hello to my fellow Mischief Makers. Wow, messed that up real fast. Good job, Drew. We are back talking about Surviving Bloomington Season 7 Mischief Makers. Today we're going to talk about Episode 4 and all of the mischief that happened in this episode because there was a lot to keep up with this episode in the best way possible. I am joined as always by Steven. Hi, Steven.
Hey, Drew. It's great to be here again. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm having you. It's definitely not you running the StreamYard. It's me having you here, for sure.
I like operating from the shadows, much like how I play Survivor, clearly. But, us alone here would be boring. And so we have with us a very special guest. We have the winner of Surviving Bloomington All-Stars and a current contestant on Survivor Pennsylvania, Jordan. Jordan, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, y'all. I'm excited to talk about this episode with you. Quick plug first. Survivor Pennsylvania episode 2 came out last night. So if you have not started that, please hop on the train, get caught up. It's great production value there.
Yes, I have heard only good things about the season, so please watch. I will be watching once like half the episodes come out because I am a binge watcher of LRGs typically. But yes, please watch Survivor PA. Support other LRGs. Let's talk about episode 4. We have a lot to jump into. My notes are aplenty. So we start off immediately jumping right into the episode with a flashback of Ryan getting voted out. And then we get the little pause and rewind that we are used to seeing sometimes in Surviving Bloomington. And we get sort of a meanwhile at Blue and Red. We get a little bit more from Blue. Jordan, did you have any big takeaways from Blue?
My big takeaway is that it seems like my guy Trace is at the bottom and may not recognize that yet. So one thing I thought was interesting, it looks like if we're looking at Red Tribe, they're trying to say Tribe Strong, but if you look at Blue, there's like a lot of fractures and divisions there. So I guess we'll see what happens if Blue loses next time.
Yeah, we get more of this like fake girls alliance thing, and it's like what we heard last episode where they're trying to push, original Red is trying to push this like 3-2-1 plan. But I think it like clicked in my brain this episode that like that's not gonna work.
Because I'm still confused by this 3-2-1 because it would require...
So, okay, we have 3 original Red, 3 original Blue. The 3 original Red want to do a fake girls alliance between May, Taylor, Brittany, and Eleanor to make a 4 and tell them to take out Joelle, who's original Red. But then when they do that, May and Taylor just vote with Joelle to take out Trace.
And where's Trace voting in all this?
That is where it clicked in my brain, like, would Brittany and Eleanor not just tell Trace to also vote Joelle?
Yeah, that's why I was really confused by it, because, like, I mean, and maybe there's a world where Trace votes for May, and, like, they do pull off a very cool 3-2-1, because I don't think, to my knowledge, this is the only tribe that doesn't have a plethora of keys, right? So extra votes really don't seem to be on the table in the discussion, right?
As far as we are aware, there's no key shenanigans going on with these people.
Yeah. So it was like the 3-2-1. It's like, it just felt like shooting the moon. Like if you could pull it off, it'd be incredible. If you can get the original Blue, the fracture in such a way, but it felt too cute.
It just like I appreciate that they're thinking about these things, and we do get. I don't know if I missed it last episode, but we do get confirmation that this was Taylor's plan, that Taylor has pitched to May and Joelle. Hey, Queen, come up with a better plan next time.
Wow.
I like that we're thinking about these things. And to be fair, it's Brittany, Trace, and Eleanor's. I think it's all of their first games. So it's like maybe they're not thinking as deeply into things, whereas Joelle, May, and Taylor are all pretty experienced with these games. So like maybe it would work because these are inexperienced players. I don't know. Jordan, what's your thought on this fake girls thing?
I don't fully understand it, but I do think that trio of like May, Joelle, and Taylor, that's a hard 3 to compete with. So whatever ends up happening, I think that those 3 are probably gonna get their way with the newbies for sure.
I also think it's very interesting that Brittany in her confessional is like, I really like these people, but if we had to target someone, I would target Taylor. And then in Eleanor's confessional, she's like, I want Taylor to be my number one, and we'll see if we can get May or Joelle out. Or Eleanor discusses just like, oh, or I'll just flip and work with those three.
Yeah. I think it's a very different discussion when you're just talking about like hypotheticals, like, oh, we won, but like what would we do, right? But it's a different conversation when like okay, we actually have to go vote in like an hour or two, right? So I think it's nice to not give Blue like a complete like purple edit where they're not included at all, but I think a lot of that conversation is just based on hypotheticals. So I think we'll see what actually
Right, and I think I was saying this last week. I don't know if I said it on camera or after we recorded the episode. It like clicked to me, and I had mentioned it to Steven. It's nice hearing all three of them be on the same page about this like fake plan, but like we need to see you guys starting to implement it. Like what we're hearing in confessionals is, oh, if we have to vote, we're gonna do this girls thing. Well, how about start forming the girls thing now to set that foundation to where if you need to or may not need to betray it later. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I was just here for all the weird stuff they're putting on the rice at the end of that segment. I think that was
Yes,
like
Mira left them hot sauce, so I know we have hot sauce.
I mean,
that's in Taylor's possession.
Drew, did you have any rice while you were in Bloomington?
Yes, we seasoned our rice on the original Chaos Tribe. We seasoned our rice with Marshawn's barbecue Pringles. And then we ate some rice the evening of day one because Jamie was exhausted from having to go to 3 tribals back to back and not eating all day. So we had rice and fruit that I stole that night. Yeah, I think that's the only time we had rice because when the merge hit, honestly, we were kind of like the merge feast was sufficient. But
and Jordan, did you do anything to your rice, or did you cook a lot of rice in your season?
During the Pennsylvania game this past summer, we obtained sugar and creamer that we put in our rice. Kind of made like a rice pudding.
How was that?
It was terrible, but I mean, when you're there, it's like you're gonna eat whatever you can, right? But I don't think I've had rice literally since then. It's just been ruined for me at this point. So
that's very fair. The only rice I really eat is the little minute rice things that you put in the microwave, which is probably gonna give me like some sort of something. I don't know. Yeah. But I have a question. So we hear from May in this episode. May's like, I don't like girls' alliances. They never work out. Jordan, as a woman, how do we feel about girls' alliances?
I really love the idea of it. I really do. And I think it's because like my favorite Survivor seasons are like with Parvati and like the Black Widow Alliance. I just think that whole scene of them like convincing what's his name to give up his it's just iconic. Like it's, and the thought of like, ooh, could we do that? Like, could we pull this off and like have like 4 girls like run a game? Like, I love the idea of it, but since that season, I don't think I've ever seen it actually work, right? And sometimes you just click with people. I've played with girls that I just simply don't click with, and guys that it's like ride or die. You know what I mean? So it's, I love the idea of it, but it's hard to pigeonhole yourself like that, I guess.
Shauna Evans, the winner of Survival Challenge 2023, used the phrase female forge. She's like, I'm not going to use female, like all girls alliance. It's a cursed term, but I will play, and I'll, to the extent I can, prioritize moving other women in the game with me. I think that's, and also think it's good to me, but I'm not going to throw my game to try to do that in the process. I thought that was a more practical take on the whole thing.
I love that.
I will say I tend to be pretty anti-alliances based on things that people can't control, so like gender, but it's also like if you naturally click with a group of people who have overlapping goals and you get along with, if it works, it works. It's like if something happens that it's just like this group of people who have one similarity, cool, love to see it. Love that May hates all girl alliances. I think that's very funny. How do we feel about Eleanor being ready to flip on Original Blue?
On a 6-person tribe, I feel like the solution is get through it. All right, it's great if you can make lasting bonds, but even better if you can just survive and move to whatever is happening next, which hopefully is a merge or a larger tribe situation. And so I think there is a more mercenary approach. Like, yes, be that person, be willing to flip, and just hope that they don't vote you out because they can't trust you after you flip, right? Just pray that, hey, if I do this, is that enough goodwill to get me through one more vote afterwards?
Yeah,
another question I have. Oh, go ahead, Jordan.
I just think you have to be able to be flexible in order to maneuver socially in the game. I will say that is my biggest nightmare when playing. I typically want to stick with the people that I've been with, and it's really hard. I feel like I'm typically not the person that's gonna flip on my original to make that work, but I think that you have to be able to do that to be successful long term.
Yeah, right. I failed doing both ways now. It's great.
Well, and it's hard, and this was going to lead into my next question is imagine you've been on a tribe, there's been one tribal council, and not even half the cast hadn't even been to a tribal council. You swap into a 3-3, and we see that May and Brittany have not interacted really yet. May tells Brittany that she has her as a bounty. Steven, if you're in this position and you're in a 3-3 and you're swapped onto a tribe with someone that you were not with previously, and you do not know outside of the game, do you tell them that you have them as a bounty to gain trust, or do you just kind of leave it alone?
I think my philosophy going to another season with bounties is just keep it to myself. That's not information I need to share, even if I'm not going to act on it. Unless I really like a person, it's boy, I think we're ride or die and we can make things work. Maybe I'll share it to kind of build that trust, especially because you just met each other the first time. But generally, I would rather not share the information.
Jordan?
Agreed. Yeah. Because I think the intention is to build trust, but I also think it can heighten that person's anxiety about, you potentially being their target because of that.
Yeah, we've seen that. We saw that last season with John and Steven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I keep it.
Anything else on Blue?
No, I think I think kind of hit the major points, I feel.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing is that Eleanor says that she feels like Trace is going to go soon and that Trace won't be able to make a deep run into the game, which I thought was super interesting because it didn't seem like Eleanor had in her head a laid out plan other than to potentially flip. But it seems like she's just kind of pitching well, I don't know if Trace is going to make a far run anyway, so he might be one of the next few to go.
I mean, Trace is interesting because on one hand, do you look at a player like him who's kind of more living in the moment and enjoying the experience and say boy, this seems the person that maybe I can go deeper with, and therefore if I sit with him to the end, I know this is looking very far, but if I sit with the end, players are gonna I can pitch my strategic game over their more social game, right? And we kind of hear in the game here as well, why doesn't Maggie flip later on? Well, she's the other side's too experienced. They're too good at this game. I can't go over there. And so, I don't know.
Trace, to me, in this season is the closest representation I have seen. Well, this is my opinion. The closest representation we have seen in recent Survivor history, whether it be LRGs of my knowledge or actual CBS Survivor, Trace is the closest we've gotten to pull someone from Survivor Borneo era and see how they would play in modern era. Just pure Survivor, using those actual survival skills. Trace has not been included in a single strategic conversation, has not been listed as someone in anybody's alliance, has not plotted or schemed at all. I really feel like Trace is our old school Survivor representation on this season.
He's a time traveler.
Yep. I see that. Yep.
All right, let's talk about the juice of the episode, the Red Tribe, the new Hospitium tribe. So the first thing we jump into, original Red, Drew, Savannah, Zach have a plan. They're going to stick together. They're going to combine keys, and they're going to get an extra vote to pull ahead of the original Blues in a 4-3. Jordan, how do we feel about this plan? How does this work out for us? How do we proceed?
It's not that simple ever, especially in a game like this, obviously, where you have keys hidden everywhere, advantages. You don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but you have to have like contingency plans. You have to have an idea of how many keys other people have. So great basic plan to start off with, but it's more complicated than that.
And then that was something I don't think we really heard in the episode, is contemplation of what keys the other side has. It was very much our keys and that we can do this. And maybe the assumption that we have keys and they don't, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of, we didn't hear a discussion like, well, if we're doing this, what are they doing with theirs?
I will say, I think the most interesting thing about this episode to me is like, what if every decision that happened on yellow last time was inverted? Like, what if someone didn't flip? What if instead of playing the keys as the shot in the dark, what if they were played as extra votes on both sides, like we knew there was the capacity of, and we had to go to a revote? And I thought that was super interesting because we kind of got to see both sides of the coin. It just, yeah, it was weird to me that they didn't consider like, what is the other side going to play?
I will say though, it's like, it's so easy watching the episodes back and asking that, but in the moment, like this is probably only what, like day 2 maybe, which is like,
yeah, this is like early afternoon of day 2, maybe early
which
afternoon.
Isn't super deep into the game, but I mean, I think even a day and a half without like your routine of getting a normal amount of sleep and like eating how you would typically, and I remember it being so hot, like it was excruciatingly hot. And when your body gets to that point where it's just like depleted, it's really hard to find the cognitive ability to like process all of like the what ifs, right?
Right. And I also think it's like a situation where when we play these games, I'm not going to say everyone, but like probably like 80 to 90% of the people who sign up for these things sign up because they want to win. The goal is to win.
Weird. Who does that?
When you have, certainly not me, winning, could never be me. When you're in that situation and you're putting this pressure on yourself, you have cameras in your face, it's 95 degrees, and you're told, hey, you have 45 minutes to end somebody's dream of winning this game. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
From Savannah, more context. We'd also just done the tug of war game.
Exactly.
And so
yeah,
our brains are running on fumes. So
I just remember that's like one specific point of that like game that I remember is like it was so hot during tug of war, and they were doing it in the like right in the sunlight, like there was no shade. So it's, and I think there's even one confessional where Francis is talking and they're like, wait, I just lost my like whole train of thought, I'm sorry.
I got a confessional in Francis's confessional. I got a sub confessional.
You got like 2, I think.
I've gotten a lot of content this season somehow.
Are you include you in the confessional count?
That feels a bit much. I would include KC or potentially Ethan confessionals, but including myself in a season I'm not a star in feels a bit much to me.
Real fast, one other thing. Hannah's asking any behind the scenes info on what the clues they were given for the
so New Red only had 1 clue, I believe, because they had only lost 1 immunity, so they knew the first letter was B. And obviously we see that Red solves it. We'll get to that in a second.
That's impressive.
The other, Eric had the first 2 letters, B, E, but as far as we are aware, has not been able to open it yet. Let's go ahead and get to that, Hannah, because I know Hannah has been very much in her head about this. We find out that the cryptex answer was betray. They only had the first letter. We don't know for certain who opened it, but it's Drew's advantage, so it doesn't really matter. And we find out that it's similar to season 6, where it is a challenge advantage that can be played pre-merge on one person on a tribe to give that person an advantage in their spot in the challenge. Steven, obviously you and I were both in the season last year where this was played. How do you feel about this as an advantage in general, alongside it being a returning advantage?
Gosh, Drew, I would have been head over heels if I could have used the advantage in that third immunity challenge and your tribe couldn't, and we could have crushed you for it. I've been really happy with the change to this challenge where like there's a level of difficulty to get access to it, and it becomes easier as you lose more. So likely it makes that person it makes the donation contestant, again, they're not invulnerable, but still a very valuable person to have because they have access to this card. Now, if I was the red team, my goal is to get Drew to play it as soon as possible, and therefore he loses. And if I was Drew, my goal is to not play it, then hold on to it as long as possible to make it so people are very reluctant about voting me out and losing that advantage. So it adds an interesting wrinkle.
And it seems like that's what Drew's trying to do. Drew says, like, my goal is to hold it for a minute, so they want to keep me around. I don't know, Jordan, how do you play this if you have it?
I think what Steven said is spot on. I do like the added component of, you have to figure out how to open it. I also think that buys a little bit of time for the person too. But yeah, like if you're Drew, you want to hold on to that as long as possible without looking sketchy. And if you're the other folks, you want to get that advantage off the table. So,
well, it seems based on what we've seen that Drew is already looking a little sketchy to these people. Maggie tells us in confessional that Drew is playing. Let's go, Drew crew. In case I didn't
need a new little
subhead, Drew got my torch from last season, so we have the Drew and the Drewbie. So I need, what else can be on the Drew crew? I need like an Andrew on next season. We can get an Andrew, a Drewbie, and a Drew, all with the same torch. That would be great. But Maggie tells us that Drew is playing, I believe the words that she uses are an obvious game.
Yeah, this was weird because we're learning a lot through confessionals. Oh, by the way, Drew, it's not Drew, it's Greg.
I was writing notes earlier and I wrote down Greg and I was like, that is not his name. Why did I do
as
that?
Far as I'm aware, the birth certificate says Drew, and he is a real Drew. I'm a fake Drew because I'm an Andrew, but he is a real Drew according to his birth certificate. So
you got receipts on that?
I'm sure they're in the annals of the government somewhere. Well, never mind. I'm not getting into that. But yeah, Maggie says Drew's playing an obvious game, and I feel like to people who are experienced players or watchers, like we know what that means, that somebody's playing an obvious game. Jordan, can you kind of explain what Maggie meant by he's playing an obvious game?
I don't actually know. Does it just mean like, I don't know like a typical kind of like loyal, like,
I think it ties into what we hear about Drew in like the cast assessment in episode 1. A lot of people call Drew out for like, they've noticed that he is very intentionally and actively going from person to person, talking to each person like, who are you? Oh, it's good to meet you. Oh, you like this? Oh, I like this too. Like very just like obviously trying to get in good with everyone.
I feel like that you should do that though. I mean, maybe like,
yeah, but you can't be too obvious that you're trying to play all sides, There comes a point where it's like, okay, pick a side.
That's fair.
Well, I mean, this is all before our first try. I mean,
yeah, but I don't think he hasn't wavered at all though. Like in this episode, there wasn't one instance where Drew was like, "Ooh, maybe I'll flip." Like, I think he's like pretty loyal to like original Red.
Yeah,
but yeah,
maybe that's what she meant, that like he's being obvious that he's loyal to Red. But Carlos tells us at one point that he feels like Francis and Drew have something going on, and we never saw that to my knowledge.
Oh, there was one point of them talking for sure. There was like
with the whispering, but like I don't know. Steven, what are your thoughts on that?
I guess I interpreted obvious as aggressive, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Like, someone who's playing very straightforward and it's like, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. But I don't think that's the right interpretation based on our discussion. Maybe he's just being very transparent and saying like, hey, I'm voting with original Red. Sorry.
I love Drew. I would want to work with Drew if I were playing in this game.
Oh, I would love to work with Drew. I love a loyal ally.
Yeah.
I love Drew.
The only thing I'm worried about is that we hear, and who knows how real this is, the plan being pitched to Maggie saying, flip with us. It'll be you, Francis, Savannah, and Zach, and we'll take out Drew second, right?
Well, to be fair, that was Maggie's plan, and Savannah and Zach are just kind of like,
yeah,
Like, we don't really hear their perspective on it, other than we do hear Zach really likes Francis and really likes Maggie. But we don't
Well,
really hear
and
Savannah's thoughts on it because it seems like Savannah is arguably the most middling person on this tribe. It's like her and Maggie are like kind of in that middle spot. I don't know.
ooh, I think
See-
Francis is the most in the middle.
Oh. Well, we do see Francis accidentally vote wrong in this tribal, which is hilarious, and we'll get to that. So I don't know.
real-
Why do you think Francis is in the middle?
well, after Francis, we'll talk more about Maggie.
I think that Francis is close with their original starting blue. And then there's like a scene where Francis and Drew are sitting and talking, just the two of them. And then there is another scene where Zach said that he is vibing with Francis a lot. So I don't really know the relationship between Francis and Savannah, but I feel like as it stands, Francis is like really in with everybody right now.
Everybody likes Francis, and I like
Everybody
Francis. I
I
would want to
know.
work with Francis.
I think Francis is in the middle. I thought going into the episode, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I was like, ooh, this Savannah Maggie thing could be good. This, like, I'm excited to see where this goes. But then how it pans out with Maggie sticking with Carlos, I'm curious. We get a lot of content of Maggie and Savannah talking, and it's like, oh, like Maggie might flip, but there isn't a lot of content with why she decided not to.
So I have more context on this. We do get a confessional from Maggie at one point saying, like, right now I am flipping. There was a point in the episode where Maggie, Savannah, and Zach are talking, and this was either not caught or not shown. I just remember in real time, like, frantically texting the crew, the production group chat, being like, oh my gosh, Maggie is fully flipped to the other side. This is crazy. Mind you, I had not seen anything that had happened on yellow because I was red during this time. So Maggie had fully flipped and then had gone to Francis and convinced Francis to fully flip. And I was like, oh my gosh, my heart. Because Carlos was my preseason winner pick. So I was like, Carlos is about to get voted out 5-1. Like, these two are fully flipped. And then Maggie and Francis go back to Carlos. Francis and Carlos knew each other pre-game. They had played orgs together. Carlos opens up to Francis. Francis goes to Maggie and is like, we have to flip back. We can't abandon Carlos. And they've both fully flipped back to staying loyal to Carlos. So in the crew group chat, I wish I would have kept that app that we used, but I deleted it. But like in the crew group chat, I remember being like, oh my gosh, Carlos is about to go out in a 5-1. And then like 10-15 minutes before tribal, I'm like, oh, just kidding. Francis and Maggie flipped back completely. So like they were definitely the swing votes of this tribal, which I thought was super interesting. And there was a point where they were completely against Carlos and Carlos was able to sway them back.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that Francis was able to convince Maggie to swing back, because if Maggie had decided not to and just tried to appease Francis and be like, yeah, okay, then that would have like potentially left Francis on the outs. So if they would have lost again, then, you know, it could have been like Maggie could have kind of saved herself a little bit. So it's interesting that Francis was able to convince her to strongly stay red strong.
Right, and it's crazy because Maggie's the one who all episode, this is a very Maggie-centric episode. All episode, it's like, will she or won't she flip? And then we see she's the one who decides, even on the revote, to stand by Carlos. Whereas the entire rest of the episode, we heard nothing about her being willing to do that.
Right.
I don't know, Steven, thoughts on Maggie, the Maggie of it all this episode?
I don't know. It's such a hard decision. Do you jump ship? Do you stay loyal? And there's merits to both directions. Clearly, results oriented didn't work out, and she may pay the price if they lose again as a result. But it's so muddy. It's hard to know what will happen going forward. Hannah has a chat. She and Rachel were chatting about how they both relate to Maggie, and Rachel said Maggie is more like a confident version of Rachel. Do you all see Rachel upset with Maggie?
Rachel upside in the sense that I think I think Maggie is a methodical thinker like Rachel is. Rachel and Maggie are both very good at slowing things down when they're one-on-one with the camera and like aligning everything and then coming up with a plan. However, personality-wise, socially, I think very different players, but that's just my opinion.
Mhm. I think I didn't get to watch as much in person of Rachel's stuff because I was at the Taylor Swift concert, so I missed that. So I'm not a good judge. I'm not a good opinion giver.
You're not
on
a good
that.
judge of music?
We'll save this fight for later, Drew.
So, I mean, in terms of did she make the right decision? I think both ways are justifiable. I don't think there is a right or wrong decision in terms of whether you stay or whether you flip, though there is better key strategy and worse key strategy, as we'll talk about later.
I think I can tell you what I think the bad decision is. I think at the beginning of the episode, I was thinking about my points throughout all of this. And at the beginning, I was like, ooh, like Savannah and Maggie, like Maggie could be like my 3 points. If she flips, that's a big decision. You know, it could give her some power. But she had so many conversations with Savannah and with Zach, where I really think Savannah and Zach trusted her. And they were like, we've got her, like she's with us. And I think that Savannah and Zach were genuine about continuing to work with her, like past this vote. But to really convince people and earn their trust and then not follow through, I don't know how Maggie navigates with this group afterwards, because it's going to be, we already see Frances try to repair afterwards. And honestly, I don't know if Frances tells everyone that vote was an accident, but if I were her, I wouldn't. I would be like, I decided to work with you guys. I would just own that shit.
Well, the thing is, she doesn't have to. She doesn't even have to own it. There doesn't have to be a claim of a wrong vote, because as we saw, Zach's extra vote carried through. We only got 4 out of 5 votes revealed.
Right.
Frances could just say, yeah, Zach's 2 and Drew's 1. Outdid me and Maggie's 1.
It's a really good point. Yeah, but I think that Maggie, we see more content of Maggie talking with Savannah and Zach about trying to flip and like build this relationship. We don't see a lot of that with Frances, but I think now the rest of the tribe is going to trust Frances more than Maggie.
So Maggie's essentially burned the bridge.
Like, it's also like Maggie is the one who pitches this 4 of her, Frances, Zach, and Savannah. So if I'm Zach or Savannah, especially if I'm Savannah, and I've just been in a tie, and then on the revote, I find out that I'm only saved because Zach had an extra vote, and I'm like, hold on, so Maggie voted against me not once but twice after pitching a 4 with me. If I'm Savannah, I'm like, Maggie's next, like she's got to go.
Yeah, that's what it would be really hard, especially because at the beginning of the episode, when Maggie and Savannah were talking, Maggie said that she thought it was going to be between Carlos and Zach. So then it ends up being between Carlos and Savannah. So again, I don't remember what happens because I have amnesia after these games. So I genuinely don't know what happens next. But I do think Maggie would really have to work some magic to be able to work with Savannah and Zach moving forward. If I were Savannah or Zach, it would be hard to trust someone after that.
I agree. And also on the note of having amnesia during season 8, I feel like I need to take notes in the real time and just keep them on my notes app to like bring up, because there are things sometimes, I mean, Steven's experienced this many times where I'll say something and then the next week pop on and be like, actually the players corrected me. I was completely wrong. Steven, what are your thoughts on, was this a good, bad, middling decision from Maggie?
I really like Jordan's take on it with bridges were burned. And so if Maggie was going to stick with Carlos, Maggie shouldn't have like played as hard and really and laid out such a good plan. I mean, I've been where Maggie is, where you don't flip, you lose, and you're just like, oh wow, I missed my window. and it's such a gutting feeling. You're like, I am now a sitting duck, literally. I mean, I think Maggie has one shot in the dark left probably at this point. She gave one away.
I believe Maggie and Francis both gave their keys to Carlos for the extra vote.
Well, Maggie had 3. I think the last time I remember it said that she had 3 keys. And I thought
Carlos had 3. Francis and Maggie, I think, each gave 1, and then Carlos played 4 of them. So I think Carlos has 1, Francis has 0, and Maggie has 1 or 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like if Red decides to stick together, which is probably like, I mean, if I was in Savannah's actual situation, I would take out one more blue and then eat one of our own if we lose a second time. That's probably the tactic I'd take. That's the safest approach, where like the minority doesn't have any say, and then you have all the ability to flip then going forward.
It's also just super interesting to me from Maggie. There's a quote I have written in my notes. Maggie says about Carlos, he won't be a ride or die for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why are we sticking our neck out this much to protect him, even on a revote after a tie?
Yeah. And
it just doesn't, like, in my brain, it doesn't click. I don't know.
And that's what was so interesting about Maggie saying, like, you all were just too good when I talk with you, and too charming, or like too social, that just like I can't work with that. And like it feels like a bit of that was maybe a little sad to hear, because like, yes, there's players who played these and players who haven't played these. But I felt like it's just like, hey, you have experience, I don't have experience, I can't go with you. It's like, I don't think
it is scary though. Like, I think number one, I don't think that there's like no hope for Maggie. I think that she's like an incredibly like social player that can win people over. So I don't think, it's 100% guaranteed that if they lose that she's going to go next. But I do think in those situations, it is really intimidating to think about being the person that flips and like what the consequences could be with that. And if you also have Francis and Carlos like really in your ear, like desperately, sometimes like the path of least resistance and what feels the most safe is like what you already know. I think it would be different. Like, let's say if Carlos was a person that was just like unlikable and like a nuisance and annoying, then it would need to be like, screw this, like I'm flipping, like nobody wants to work with that person, whatever. But that's not
the Marshawn vote last season.
Right, and I think honestly the reason Carlos did it is because Carlos felt super comfortable with Francis, and like Francis would have his back the whole time. And like obviously she does until she accidentally votes against him.
But it doesn't matter.
But that didn't matter anyway. Yeah. And like I said, I think Carlos's biggest flaw was not that he was unlikable or that he was a bad player. He just wasn't active fast enough.
Yeah. He's like a cast iron skillet. It takes a little bit of time to warm up, and that's fine.
Gotta season it.
You have to know. Like, you just, you know what I mean? You have to be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the, he's played other games that have kind of this first day kind of slow and the second day really speeds up. So like that shouldn't have been like a crazy format change for him. But yeah, no.
But Carlos is the player that survives on larger tribes, where he can take time and develop these relationships where he's like ride or die with this group of people. When he's thrown into A, a small tribe, and B, a small tribe where half of the people, where half of the people he never interacted with, he's an easy one to pick off, because the other side, when Carlos is slow to warm up, it's like, well, Carlos isn't talking with me, he can go.
Yeah.
One thing I've been thinking is like going forward, like both original red and original blue have lost a member. I think it'll be really telling to see what happens going forward. And like, let's say original red just like yellow just throws challenge after challenge, picks off the next 2 red, and suddenly original red is looking kind of down the numbers, right? Let's say there's like 5 of them left or 6 of them left. Right. Then there starts to become real merit saying, I think we need to keep Maggie or Francis, at least one of them, because we need inroads to the other side. And we need this person to rely on to help get us there, because we just walk into, let's say, a merge, just the 3 of us as a tight 3 red, and it's all original blues, we might be in trouble.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that we're seeing on 2 of the tribes, being new red and new blue, that original red are kind of dominating the strategy, whereas on yellow, old blue is dominating the strategy. So I think that could be something to look out for. I do have a question Steven, you tend to be more of a thinker in the game. I tend to be more social, and Jordan, you tend to kind of blend those two a little bit more. Do we think Carlos would have been better off using 4, or he may have had 5 keys as a shot in the dark instead of an extra vote? Like
I've been
Jacob
thinking so
did?
much about this.
I do. And I didn't even think about that until I think maybe Casey asked during tribal, like, at what point do you try and save them? And like, I don't know, he asked a question about utilizing these different resources. And I was like, oh damn, like if he had 4 keys, you know, the percentage is, my math ain't mathin', but I don't know, especially with, it would have been different if Carlos himself didn't play the extra vote, right? Like if you ideally have sleep and food and you're functioning fully in your brain, then you can think that these extra votes will carry through. So if it's a tie between me and Savannah, somebody else needs to play this so that it carries through, right?
Well, and to be fair, there is no precedent in Bloomington about extra votes carrying through, but also they did not think to ask. So it's like, had they had more time, they may have A, thought to ask, or B, thought through like, oh, maybe we shouldn't give the person who would be getting the votes the keys.
I think it depends on if you've watched previous seasons, because I know that Casey has always said that any advantages play will always carry through. Like if it's
that was for the double tribals. He's always been clear about that.
Yeah. Well, and I will say,
watching
this is something I mentioned before we went live. There are a couple of people have reached out to me and been like, hey, extra votes don't carry through to the revote. Well, and my response to that, on behalf of Casey, I will speak for Casey here, unless he chimes in otherwise at some point, and I'll correct myself. At this tribal, the question was asked, do extra votes carry through? And I do remember us having a production meeting determining, do advantages carry through? And the decision was very much verbalized in Surviving Bloomington. If you play an advantage at a vote and there is a revote after a tie, it persists. That is different than CBS Survivor, and that is because Surviving Bloomington is not CBS Survivor. It is its own thing. And that was established after the revote, but I think the players assumed that CBS rules apply, which is neither really on them nor on KC, because like before the game, you can't really like sit down the players for an hour and go through every possible scenario.
It's impossible.
So it's like you should have asked to make sure. And Zach, like, it's not your fault that you assumed something, but like it is what it is, you know?
Yeah.
Also, wait, I don't want to leave this too soon. Yeah. So if Carlos plays, I believe he has at least 4, potentially 5 keys. If Carlos plays those as a shot in the dark, almost certainly Savannah goes out here.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, we were just talking that Carlos had what, like 3? Wait, Francis says it in a confessional that Maggie had 2, I thought, 2 or 3. Carlos had 2, and Francis had 1. So if, like, I feel like they could have given him more. Like, they gave him enough for an extra vote.
So originally the plan was for everybody to give Maggie the keys from Original Blue and for Maggie to do something. So Francis gave their keys to Maggie, and then Maggie gave those to Carlos at the end of the round.
So Carlos in total, out of all of them, with all of their keys together, they had 4, right?
In total, they had either 5 or 6.
So that's what I'm saying. Carlos, like, if they're already using,
if you had 6,
try and save him, just play it as an idol, I think.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I would love, since there are so many Hospitium people in the chat, for more knowledge on this, or I can ask Casey and have clarification next week on who had what keys. Yeah. But from my understanding, Francis had 1 at the start, Maggie had 2, and Carlos had 3. Francis gave 1 to Maggie, so Maggie had 3, Carlos had 3. Maggie gave 1 or 2 to Carlos, and Carlos played 4. So after the round, it was either Maggie had one, Carlos had one, or Maggie had two, Carlos had zero, and Francis had zero. I don't know. Regardless, I think it would have probably been better to do a shot in the dark, but hindsight's 50-50, and also we're seeing everything, and in the game, they're only seeing their perspective. Yeah, there you go.
5.
Yeah.
So Carlos had 5. Maggie remained with 1. Carlos played 4. So at the end of the round, Francis had 0. Carlos had 1, which he had to give up when voted out, and Maggie had 1.
Another important thing too would be, did the original red, so Savannah, Drew, and Zach, were they convincing enough that maybe Carlos wasn't fully convinced that it was him, right? Like maybe if he could have bought an idol, maybe he didn't, because maybe he thought it would be on like Maggie or someone else. Because there was a little bit of
fear. Carlos knew he was getting votes from the start. Like he was well aware he was the target from that side.
Okay.
Like 100%. I'm like very confident in that. And Carlos,
to me, that would be the justification of using an extra vote as opposed to an idol, because if you purchase an idol for someone, you could be saving the wrong person. Yeah. So potentially maybe they bought the extra vote thinking that it was like the most safe option, I guess. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, can I revisit a little the Jacob vote from last episode?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so we had this long conversation talking about, was Jacob right or wrong to put the shots in dark instead of buying an extra vote? And I was more on he should have bought the extra vote, mainly because that was what his alliance was expecting. And I don't think I had really realized that the extra votes persisted in such a manner. And so, like, had he bought the extra vote and there was that 4-4 tie, and they don't, and original blue, Eric, Mariah, and Jacob don't cast their votes on the correct person who also plays keys, it would have been terrible, because Jacob would not have voted in the revote. It would have been all bad. Though you might have to ask, given again the most recent CBS Survivor episode where it's like, well, you don't vote because your votes cancel out, but if one person has 2 votes, one person has 1 vote, do you still just cast 1 vote instead of 2? Right.
Yep.
But
we need to pull up Carlos' comment that he just put.
Yeah, so if I thought I was the vote, I would 100% play the shots in the dark.
So who did you think was the vote? I'm assuming you thought the vote was going to be Savannah in a 4-3.
Well, no,
I'm not trying to be rude. I really just want to understand.
Towards the end of the episode, there's a confessional, or there's like a clip of Carlos and Francis talking, and Carlos is like, yes, Carlos, I think Zach convinced Carlos that they were going to flip and do Maggie instead of him.
Yeah.
Which is great work.
To you, Zach.
Yeah, which is great work to avoid an idol play, because if you don't know who they're actually going for and you're trying to stay strong to your original color, then it makes more sense to buy an extra vote as opposed to playing an idol and guessing.
Zach did a lot of work in this round.
Yeah, I guess, my takeaway from all this is, given that extra votes persist, and when you are in tight strides, like, making the correct person buy the extra vote matters so much. And it's such a hard, and so props to Zach. I mean, props to Zach for getting away with it, because like this could have, like, Savannah is kind of saying in the chat, like, she would have been cooked in many situations here had Carlos, even with 4 keys or 5 keys, that's such a high likelihood of safety. This is I don't know what to say at this point.
That takes a lot of trust, though, because if people gave Carlos those keys, he could have said, so Carlos could have just totally screwed them over and been like, give me the keys, I'll play an extra vote, and he could have used them as shots in the dark.
I would just like to remind everyone that on original blue, the majority alliance that was named was Carlos, Mariah, Jacob, Eric, and Eleanor. So Francis and Maggie were not in a named alliance with Carlos. So Carlos goes into this swap already feeling like these two other people, Maggie and Francis, are like not necessarily with them. Not to mention there's this made up beef because for some reason Carlos is claiming Jacob's rogue vote on Maggie.
Nice
I
of a thing to
actually
do.
thought that was really smart. I thought that
Okay, so it sounds smart to me, but I'm like, in reality, if I'm Carlos, sure, I'm publicly claiming it, but in private, I'm going to Maggie being like, hey, so Jacob and I had this thing, just so you're aware, like Jacob got an extra key for this, and in return, I agreed to claim the vote. I did not vote for you. You can obviously not believe me if you want to, but like Jacob was the vote for you for the sake of getting our group another key.
right.
That's
But
how
then
I would
she
have approached
knows
it.
but then she knows that they have a key because of that.
Yeah, but like you
See.
you pitch it as if like
Yeah.
Maggie, it was for our common good,
Right. Yeah.
for
But I think
original
that
Blue's common good.
I think
mean-
my lesson for that is never, no matter how safe you feel, don't ever offer up, yeah, you can throw a rogue vote on me. Because that's where it all started. Because Carlos offered that up. And then, but yeah, so I'm curious if Carlos gave permission for Jacob to do that. And then Jacob
He
was like,
did.
oh, you cool with it? Okay, cool. Because then it started this thing of like, well, you said I could vote for you. Now you're worried about catching votes. So like now you have to help me figure this out. Right. So then
Well, yeah,
Carlos,
if I'm Carlos, so the agreement was, Jacob, if you don't vote for me, I'm Carlos. Jacob, if you don't vote for me, I will say that I cast the extra vote.
right.
How about Jacob doesn't vote for me and then I just say nothing? And so it's like, oh, somebody rogue voted. And it's irrelevant. And probably 2 rounds from now, everybody forgets about it.
Yeah.
But instead, because you got swapped on the same tribe as the person who got the rogue vote, and you're deciding to verbally follow through with that, people are like, oh, Carlos and Maggie have beef from this other vote. When in reality, there's no beef, and
define
also
them, though.
Maggie doesn't care.
Yeah.
Right. It does give you like weird feelings though. Like you can be like, he threw a vote on me. I don't care. But like that's still in the back of your mind. And Maggie mentions it at the beginning of like, I know that Carlos voted for me last round. You know what I mean? So Carlos really got kind of swap screwed on that. Like,
unfortunately, I feel like the best move for Carlos was just to not say anything and not cop up to the rogue vote because 1, he didn't cast it, and 2, because it would hurt his game to own up to it. But you know, I wasn't on the season, and so I am having in my brain like the overview and like, oh yeah, in hindsight, this is the optimal move. Also, I'm not Carlos, so
right. Well, and Carlos is also trying to like appease Jacob and like nurture
yes.
that
Well,
relationship.
because him and Jacob are in an alliance together, so it makes
Right.
sense that like, yeah, sometimes you have to sacrifice for the good of the alliance.
Yeah. And Carlos, like,
also,
we're talking about Carlos also kind of being like a slow burn. Like in his head, he might be thinking like, okay, for the next few hours, I'm going to let Maggie think this, but eventually like I'll repair that. But like, you never know when a swap's going to come. You know what I mean?
yeah, and also to be fair to Carlos, he did think in that Gibble tribal that there was the potential that that secondary alliance was real, even though we have since learned exactly. We have since learned that specifically Francis, and with Francis in that round comes Brittany and Maggie. They were never actually going to vote Carlos, but Carlos's perception and Gibble's perception was that they would have voted Carlos. So Carlos is like, anything to keep me from being eliminated this round. Sure, I'll cop up to a rogue vote.
Right.
Yeah. Steven, we learned that Zach walked in on Carlos in the porta potty.
I mean, they have porta potties this season?
We had an outhouse. Now, this
Porta
outhouse,
potty is generous. It's an outhouse.
this outhouse I used once on day 2, and after using it was like, never again. I will be going in the woods from now on.
Yeah.
It
It's
was rough.
essentially like an elevated, like you're sitting on like an elevated bucket. It's not a porta potty. It's just an outhouse. Yeah.
It was offered for players who were uncomfortable doing business out in nature. And like I said, after about day 2, I think I said this on last week's podcast. After about day 1 or day 2, I was like, you know what? While these tribes are out doing challenges, I'm just going to sneak into one of the camps and use the toilet paper and do my business outside of one of the camps because yeah. So that was very funny to me. We also do get some Zach personal content regarding Maggie and how Zach feels like the name Maggie for him personally has a lot to live up to because he had a friend named Maggie who had passed. I thought that was a really good personal moment. I think Zach, I don't know how to phrase this. I don't think he was using it as strategy in any way, but I do think it was very interesting that he used the same wording when he explained it to Maggie and in confessionals. To me, I perceive that as this is something that has really weighed on him and he knows how to communicate it. So I really appreciated us getting that personal moment from Zach. Yeah. Thanks for breaking the tension of a serious moment, Daddy Matt.
No, Drew, I wrote down loves Zach's moment talking about his friend Maggie. We love an emotionally vulnerable king.
Yeah, I like when people are able to show those emotions, and honestly, the more that the elements and the lack of sleep and the pressure of the game get to you, the more you'll break down about those sorts of things. So I think it was nice that we got a moment like that from Zach early. So shout out to Zach for being willing to be emotionally vulnerable on camera. That takes a lot when you know you're being recorded. So I personally
Drew
really
in the first episodes with Drew talking about his family, I thought that was really impactful and sweet too.
I really appreciate the vulnerability.
Men. Way to be vulnerable, men.
Yes.
I appreciate you. We need that.
Yes. I love that is true masculinity is being willing to be vulnerable. We go to tribal unless there's anything else pre-tribal we want to discuss.
I love Francis's injury updates. That's one thing.
I love Francis for sure.
I think. Oh, I thought it was interesting that Francis knew that Carlos was Savannah's bounty. I think that's another like thing that kind of shows how in the middle Francis is like she has information about other people that they just joined with. So I thought that was like cool that she knew that and tried to use that to like pull Maggie back. But that's all I got. Those are my notes.
Yes, I also think something interesting, not that this is like intentional by any means, this is the second time in the season that Maggie has been an inherited advantage or inherited bounty.
Yeah.
She was inherited as a bounty on her original tribe and now on her second tribe. Because both cases, the person who had her was voted out. So that's fun. We get to tribal. As usual, these people are refusing to answer Casey's questions with like actual answers.
Survivor
See
talk.
season 6 if you want to know how to actually answer questions, because some of us in that season actually answered the questions Casey gave us at tribal.
Brady as an example of what you should do.
Yeah, Brady, Tyler, Daddy Matt. If you want to know how to answer questions at tribal, see those three. We go to the first vote. Comes up, shockingly, I would say, as a viewer, it comes up as a 4-4. I think both the players and the viewers were expecting either a 3-3 or maybe like a 4-3. We go into the revote. We see Zach being like, oh, I still get an extra vote. We also see one of my favorite parts of the episode. Francis accidentally votes incorrectly on the revote. Francis tells the camera, I'm ready to go to rocks. I'm ready to cause a tie, and then turns around the vote and it says Carlos. 100% confirmed. Francis accidentally wrote Carlos' name. Jordan, how would you feel if you found out after a tribal you accidentally voted for the wrong person and that person went home?
You know what? At that point, I think I would be like, that was just fate. Like what was supposed to happen happened. And you gotta like try and make something out of it moving forward, right? You can't like be hung up on it. One thing that's interesting though is the vote won. They're at a stalemate tie, right? And I'm assuming that Drew, Zach, and Savannah aren't 100% certain on who cast the extra vote vote one, right? So obviously it's a stalemate. They're going to revote, and Casey says like no talking, just go vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even though Francis writes down the wrong name, they're the only one that mentions anything about going to rocks. So like everyone else was just going to vote the exact same. But if like I don't know, if they knew that Carlos had the extra vote and it wouldn't carry through.
No one did.
But
right?
then, yeah, because then it's like, well, we don't have to worry about it because Zach has the extra.
I guess there's
Carlos
hope that all right, if Carlos doesn't have the extra vote because he can't vote, Savannah in that case. Well, I guess this one going to earlier. So because I always assume as soon as you were tied on, you should never vote, right? But CBS, the big debacle this past week was like, well, yes, you're tied on, but because Justin has no vote, but Sai, you have a vote, you can continue to vote even though you are being tied on, right? And so in this
I didn't think that you could do that.
Yes, in this case, Carlos has 2 votes, right? Savannah has 1 vote, and so following that logic, Carlos should still be able to cast 1 vote.
but put that logic aside. If we like, let's just pretend that Francis is the one that cast the extra vote. Let's just pretend it wasn't Carlos. If Carlos and Savannah aren't voting and the other 4 vote the exact same way that they did the first time and Francis doesn't write the wrong name down, it would be another stalemate and nobody else mentions in like while they're voting if they're like willing to go to rocks. Like Francis is the only one that's like, hey, I'm willing to go to rocks over this. But like,
well, if Francis votes wrong twice, I mean, Carlos goes out, and I think we see a full-on Francis meltdown.
Right, but if Francis did not accidentally write,
but it's also such a bad rock draw too because Drew has that immunity.
Right,
it's not a 25% chance.
So it's a Zach, Francis, Maggie rock draw.
Yeah, this is like blood versus water.
I guess I'm just like shocked. I mean,
also,
it's hard. Because Casey said that they couldn't talk. He was like, no talking, we're going to revote. But like, I think I was expecting them to talk a little bit more at the voting booth of like, oh, I'm nervous, like that we're going to go to rocks. But Francis is the only one that mentions that. So I guess I have to assume that they were all willing to go to rocks over Carlos and Savannah.
Steven, I'm just now thinking about the logic of like theoretically Carlos should have had 1 vote because the reason people involved in the tie can't vote typically on a revote is because they can only vote for each other.
Yeah.
Which is why I've had my gripes in the past about in 3-way ties they should still be able to vote.
Mm-hmm.
But on CBS in 3-way ties they're not allowed to revote, correct?
Have we seen it? Oh, gosh, when's the last time we've had a 3-way tie?
I don't know. I believe the ruling in CBS is that on 3-way ties you can't revote, but honestly, anything after like season 35, I'm like, I have no memory. Like I need to rewatch everything from like 35 on. But yeah, I guess like CBS rules would dictate that like the only reason you can't vote when you're in the tie is because you can only vote for the other person, so you cancel each other's votes out. So if someone loses their vote, like we just saw in the most recent episode of 48, like you could still vote if you weren't the person that lost their vote because your vote would penalize the other person.
Yeah.
Right.
Which really blew my mind.
So
like,
theoretically, if Bloomington was playing by CBS rules, Carlos would have still gotten 1 vote in the revote. But Bloomington rules... Yeah, there you go. Sure.
Casey's saying that new CBS thing is wrong. That made that up. Everyone knows the rules. Anyone involved in a tie doesn't get the revote. Which
I 100% agree with Casey.
Mark Burnett has spoken, ladies and gentlemen.
I was watching that episode and I was like, that shit's fake. That's not how it's ever been. That's messed up. Like, it should be on that one person to decide. Like, I agree with Casey on that. But even so, if Carlos would have been able to cast 1 vote and if Francis didn't vote wrong, it would have been a 3-3 tie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think it's interesting that neither Maggie nor Francis intentionally flipped, and it seemingly they would have both been willing to go to rocks for Carlos.
2 things. 1, thank you for using neither nor correctly. Number 2, Jordan, no one's bought a Power of Mischief.
What is the saying of like I don't know. I don't want to butcher it, but like if you have keys, my thinking personally is like this is something guaranteed that I know exactly what this means. I know that if I have 4, I get an extra vote. I know that if I have 6, I have an idol. If I have 5, like such a great chance at, getting immunity. And for me, I would rather rely on certainty versus giving up the certainty to like risk it on a power of mischief, especially if you have no idea what that means. Like,
So talking from a game developer perspective, should the players just receive a list of here are the different powers that you may randomly get, or B, should the price have been one key per power of mischief? Like, so therefore, like I'm curious.
I think one is too cheap because then you're gonna have a million of them in the game. Thank you. Well, that's what. Yes, that's the phrase that I was trying to figure out.
Worth more than 2 in the bush is the phrase. 1 in the hand is worth more than 2 in the bush. So yeah, like I said last week or week before, originally it sounded like the mischief powers would be like wild card sort of thing, and so the players were really concerned that they may be negative. And so I remember again another production meeting where I specifically was like, Casey, the players are concerned that these are going to be bad. And so Casey started saying in tribals like they are called powers of mischief. You think something called a power would be bad? And we see some of the players like Jacob in the last episode. Yeah. Jacob says like, well, some of us don't want to risk it. And Casey's like, well, they're powers. And Jacob's like, no, not for me.
I mean, I like Casey's describe them as an upgrade because I gave it a lot of clarity to what these are. Like, these are ways to upgrade your keys. And the problem, I think the problem is, well, first, no one's going to make keys left to buy them because, like, we've taken 12 of the original 20 keys out of the game, sort of ish. I don't know if you had to do a key count, but we're up to 8 or 9 total keys in the game right at the moment. So, like, no one's playing these anytime soon, it seems like.
I also think, like, and again, I was there this past summer, but I don't remember what any of the powers were, probably because I was making potions with Daddy Matt's child the whole time. But I don't remember what they are, but I'm trying to think for me, what would be worth exchanging 5 or 6 keys for? Like, I mean, I'm not good at idol play anyway. Like, anytime I've ever had an idol, I've never played it correctly. I've never actually used it when I needed it. Like, I'm not good at it, but that's, like, in my opinion, like one of the most powerful things in a game. Like, it can guaranteed like save you through a round if you need it, right? It's like so I'm like thinking like, what could I potentially gain from a power of mischief that would be more meaningful?
Instead of buying the keys, what if like the powers of mischief were hidden, or the power of mischiefs were something that were given from the people voted out into the game? Like, maybe there's another way we could see those powers in the game that still control them and didn't make it like the crazy free-for-all in a way without, like, I don't know. Drew is clearly like, nah.
I'm like thinking through it, and like part of me is like, it's nice to give eliminated players that one last like whatever, but also it's like to get. We're used to seeing idols hidden in Survivor games. In Bloomington, we're used to seeing keys hidden, and that's something that you have to either go find or you have to accomplish a small task to earn. I don't necessarily like a new power being something that's just granted. I think it needs to be something that's sacrificed for, and I think 2 keys is a reasonable sacrifice.
Is that how much they were, too?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not bad. I couldn't.
I guess it's just like, it's without seeing the full list of what the powers are. I'll be very curious once they're bought, once they come in place. Don't spoil Drew whether that happens or not. What ends up happening with them and how.
I think it's funny that you think I could spoil. Every week is a new experience for me. I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember this.
What a way to live.
Yeah, I was telling like you guys before we started recording, like, I genuinely don't even remember who wins this season. Like, I don't know what happened to my brain, but I guess as soon as I drove off property, I just like literally forgot everything. But hopefully if the powers of mischief continue into the future, then future players will watch this season. And ideally, if anybody buys one, we'll have an idea of like what that could look like. because I don't remember what they are, honestly.
Yeah, I think for me, like I've said previously, I am not particularly willing to spend keys on advantages because I'm not an advantage player. The one time I did spend keys on season 6 was because I genuinely, in the bottom of my heart, was like, yeah, they're voting me out here, and I played 2 keys and then I received 0 votes. So I don't know. It's just I'm not, like I said, I'm not an advantage person. But one thing I did want to say that's like somewhat unrelated is there are a lot of players on the season in the chat, and anything I say that's wrong, please correct me because I am not a primary source of information. You guys are. So please correct me. Specifically, Zach, I see you like showing a lot of your opinion and like your perspective that is different from mine. So please correct me. I am not correct a lot of the time. But we get tribal, we get the 4-4, and then on the revote, we end up with a 4-1, 5-1, 4-1, 4-1. And Carlos is the 3rd person voted out, 4th eliminated from the season. Of course, we do have Redemption Island, so there's always the chance for Carlos to return. So on Redemption Island right now, we have Gibble, Ryan, and Carlos. We love to see men voted out early, unless they're me. We love to see men as early boots, so that's fun.
So general production question. Should I as the viewer not expect to see anything regarding redemption until the redemption challenge, or will there be snippets kind of woven into episodes of
I fear that's a Casey question, not a
Yeah.
Drew or Jordan question.
I also just found out how to see comments on this, so I didn't even know that was there.
Usually me and Steven remember to tell people how, but we did not. So
I mean, it says comments, so that's my bad. But yeah, hopefully Casey can answer that.
Yeah,
I remember showing up and Gibble was already at Redemption, and he was just at like they're kind of like in a cove, like in the camp is like at the back end of the cove, and Gibble was just standing like at the front end of the cove, like with his hands on his hips, just like trying to stare.
He was always like
all by himself.
He was always shirtless, and he had a staff, and he was always like,
seriously. And I'd never met him, and I was like, who is this kid still like game playing hard by himself, and it's like 90 degrees and he has a beanie on? Like, who is this kid? And I absolutely love him now. Yes, he literally would stand there and death stare everyone that would walk by. Hilarious. I absolutely love Gibble, but at the time I was like, this dude's weird. Like, what is he doing?
I am a Giblet through and through. Gibble's on my draft team. I stand Gibble. So when Gibble comes back from redemption and then wins every individual immunity and then wins the season, y'all know where I stand on it.
Yep. Following it.
So let's talk about some gifts.
Let's do so. Give me a second. Which screen should I see? All right. I have 4 gifts to serve up as offering today. Let me bring it over. So the first gift is May drawing her new bounty, who delivers Britney Spears' iconic line. It's Britney. I don't know. I thought that was just such a really clever moment, a funny moment on her behalf.
Britney Spears was number 3 on my Spotify Wrapped last year, which I'm sure 0% of you are surprised to find out. So hearing this in the episode was fantastic to me. We love Britney Spears. May, shave your head, I dare you.
For the next season. Next we have I think I should have put like a question mark after the number 7, but like this is part of like when Frances described like her long list of injuries, and like she's like, is it an injury? I don't know, but I went down and had a second challenge. But I just love the moment where like she just has her fans fanning her.
And I love Dallas. So Dallas is the one fanning her, and Dallas had that like flop fan on the season. So anytime anything like shady happened, it was like So it was very nice to have that. I love that.
Yeah, hilarious.
Just like Zach, like just not paying attention as he walks on really trips, just amused me in the moment.
There was a stump like right there that's what he tripped over, was a stump that we had cut to put tribal there, and we reminded people before every tribal, and still almost every tribal someone tripped over it.
I think I tripped over it multiple times too.
Yeah,
The
for
placement
sure.
was not great of that. Yeah, that's hilarious.
And then this was just a great scene where everyone's reacting to like there's an 8th vote.
Oh no.
Maggie's look of panic. Great.
Good.
Wow.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So yeah, so that's what I have for that. And then Casey sent a secret scene. So if you give me a second,
Let's go.
Let's see if I actually get the audio work going on the first try this time. Probably not.
Steven, I'll just go ahead and tell you we have no audio.
Well, this time I'm at work, so everything's on. I have multiple screens. All right. Let me know if you can't hear anything.
Yes to both.
Also, sorry, real fast, some context for this scene. This is the last conversation with Maggie, Francis, and Carlos. Word of caution, there's a lot of whispering. So we'll see what we can hear, but this is the footage of the last conversation before Tribal Council.
Are you able to up the quality?
Theoretically.
Wow, I never knew you could do that. Learn something new every day.
Wow, you're so old, Jordan.
You're 3 solid. Like, I think like this 3, like we are solid. I think so. Carlos has the keys. You have the keys. I'm gonna do that. Okay. As you go, Savannah. Yes. Okay. I'm Savannah. What's going on? Thanks for doing it.
They think everybody's in me.
Mm-hmm. They think I came down here to make you feel comfortable if you don't play keys.
Huh?
They think I told them I was coming down here to make you feel comfortable so you don't play keys. What you're going to do?
Fuck them.
Hey, Carlos. No. I'm just like, I know you're so
Honestly.
stressed. And I'm just
Seriously, like
I'm sorry to
no, it's fine. Like I was telling her like sometimes I keep my word. So I'll tell you this. The reason I voted for her, I found a key and I have to throw my money.
okay.
And that's why I knew that they didn't have it. That the chances of them having to get it, because they would have to go to her house. And then I figured that I wanted to be honest publicly that I voted and that she would be released back, which is so consistent. But like there was definitely keys out there. I found it in the Westbury European.
What did it look like?
It's the bag, the same
Bag,
bag.
okay.
Yeah, the same bag, and it had a scroll in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have the directions now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was trying to not be obvious, but like it was in a little hole. Yeah.
Alright.
Should I just like bring it like I kind of went anyway.
The snake comes out.
Yeah, I will run screaming if a snake comes out. That will not be caught on camera.
Do you want to look at that one? I'm sorry, I've been like so finicky. I feel like there's certain people like I connect with in terms of communication, and like our style wasn't immediately a connect. That's fair. I have a friend just like him, and like once that clicked in my head, I was like, okay, I get it. So we are 3 solid.
And that's why I think I need to go with something because I know some don't versus like Zach and Savannah. so fucking friends. Like I love them. Oh my god, they're so social.
Yeah. And I'm like, I want to hang out with them.
I just find out that Savannah asked Carlos, so we have to be giving them the key.
That makes sense. Okay. Who do you have again?
I have Zach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who has to be? Drew, probably.
Zach does.
Oh, okay.
He told me. Because I asked you at Carlos.
Okay. Who do I have? I have Drew. Okay. All right. I feel good. Do you feel good?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Does
it make you feel better that he has the keys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
I figured
don't
it would
care,
calm you down, like, since I expressed, like, a different...
What's the plan?
Oh, okay.
we're going Savannah and Carlos has 4 keys and is going to buy an extra boat. So we're hoping if they don't have the extra keys and they really think that we're with them, it'll be a 4-3 for Savannah to go.
Yeah, because there's no way that they have another key since we think that it's only tasks.
There's some like challenges, but
Yeah, so that's
I
the
think,
plan.
I think we're going forward with one less ally, but I think it's a much stronger ally who also has a lot less options.
No, that makes sense.
Remember what? You could always talk out things with me.
Okay, thank you.
You like
And ditto.
there's no I'm not like, oh my god, so fluffy. Like that's what we're here for. We're here to talk things out. Like you and me, we can talk every single thing out.
Yeah.
Every round. If you want to throw out every single person's name, we'll go down pros and cons.
Do we-
That's fine.
Do we vote Francis?
I definitely want that one. But hey, if you need me to convince you, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I feel good.
See, what are you talking about? What's the plan? Also, I'm so real. If there was a snake that popped out of that hole, I would have run full speed away from that conversation.
I thought that was your voice.
Yeah, that was 100% me.
Good work.
I try. Some of my confessionals are not good. Like this episode, I did May's and Eleanor's confessional. I did most of Blue's confessionals, and they're like super out of focus because I had no idea what I was doing on camera. But once I was educated by the lovely Ethan and the lovely Seth, I got significantly better. So props to Ethan and Seth. Significant props to them.
Good
But
teacher.
yeah, that was super informative, I feel like, where Francis seemed to be really reassuring Maggie, and Maggie was really communicative about like, sorry, I've been wishy-washy. Like they had me for a second, but like I'm back. I understand Carlos. I understand you. Like I'm with you guys. Stephen, what did you gather from that?
It was interesting hearing them come back together and Maggie kind of explain what had been going on in our thought process, and kind of apologizing, and then kind of really re-solidifying things, and just the hope of like we have keys, they don't. And I wish there had been more consideration. What if we both play an extra vote? What happens then?
I will say props to Carlos though.
Yeah.
It didn't end up working in his favor, but I feel like a lot of people in this scenario, I know towards the end he was kind of convinced that maybe it would be Maggie, but I feel like a lot of people in this scenario, when you feel like someone is gunning for you, that you kind of like freak out and you do like anything in your power to try and like flip it on to someone else. And we don't see him doing that. So I don't know. I personally like that. I like working with people that like can be calm in like high pressure situations like that. And he could have just freaked out and been like throwing Maggie under the bus or something.
Yep. Yeah, and honestly, good on him for like being able to walk away and let them talk about stuff. That takes a lot of like trust in allies to do that, even when you're like kind of sure your name's on the block.
Yeah.
But with that being said, let's move to Bloomy points. Pew, 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 pew. Bloomy points, for those who are just now tuning in for the first time, are based on Chizzy points from Rob Has a Podcast. We give 6 points each. per episode for the top 3-ish players of the week. Typically, the format is we each give a 3-point, a 2-point, and a 1-point for who we think are the 3 best players of the week. And I will lead us off because I'm pretty confident with my points this week. I will start off. I'm going to give my 3 points, my player of the week, to Zach. I think Zach played a really good social game. Zach played a really good strategic game. Zach's not being targeted. He was included in essentially every group thrown out. And we got personal content from Zach that made me like him more. So aside from strategy, I am also enjoying Zach from an entertainment and a personal standpoint. So 3 to Zach.
Ditto. I mean, I'm giving 3 to Zach as well. I think I was probably going to beforehand, but I was more convinced, especially when hearing, why Carlos chose to not play the shots in the dark. I think that last minute interference really saved the day.
Yep. I have Zach for 3 also. Thought that playing the extra vote for one of his allies, also making like really good inroads with the original blue on the tribe. Yeah, I think that when we think about who is like most better off after this, like who took the least amount of damage, who earned some inroads, I think that Zach fares the best in this episode.
Sure. I'll jump in with my 2. I am going to give 2 points to Savannah. I think even though she received half of the votes this episode, I think Savannah made good inroads with Maggie, and I think Savannah is still very much trusted by both Drew and Zach. Theoretically, she's in the majority on that tribe moving forward in 3-2. I think Savannah is a good challenge asset. I really, really want more confessionals from Savannah. We got a decent amount this episode. I would love to hear more in the future. She's towards the lower end of the confessional count overall. But I think Savannah had a good social strategy episode.
You want to go, Steven?
Can you go before me?
I had Savannah also, and it was really tough when I was trying to do the 3-2-1. I kept oscillating between Zach and Savannah for my 3 and my 2, and really hearing about Zach's work with convincing Carlos that it was Maggie really like kind of pulled Zach to the 3 for me. But I thought Savannah did really well, also making inroads with Francis and Maggie. Also got a bullet from Carlos. I also think that Savannah didn't lie to anyone in this episode, so they were always upfront with it being Carlos. And I think that now in the majority alliance, Francis and Maggie are like kind of on their heels and are going to have to try and work to get back in the good graces, but they don't have any reason to not trust Savannah at this point. So I think that she did a great job.
I'm going to do something you've done, Drew, where I'm not going to do it. I'm going to give 3 1 points. I'm not going to do a 2-1, I'll do a 1-1-1, and I'll give one of those points to Savannah as well. I think this was a risky travel for her, but she's positioned in the center, and so she and Zach have a lot of choice of where they want to go next if they lose again.
Oh, I also want to add that after Tribal, we get like some content of them talking like right after Tribal.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Savannah was like calm and cool, you could get a hothead that's like, don't talk to me right now, I'm pissed off. But I think that Savannah handled it really well with like, it's okay, it's just a game. Like
you could be a Savannah or you could be a Brady. And those are your 2 routes you can go. It's up to you to decide. Both could work. You never know.
It really well.
Yeah. Steven, who are your other single points going to?
So I'm going to give 1 point to Eleanor. I think identifying when you should jump, and I like how she's positioning and making herself and giving herself the out to jump and not be blue strong as something as is if need be. And then I'm going to give it to Carlos. Despite him getting voted out, I think this really could have been a 5-1. This really could have been a 5-1 or a 6-1 on him, where everyone dogpiles on Carlos and he does nothing. And maybe he plays the extra vote, or maybe he's still led and he doesn't play it. But I think it was pretty impressive that first he brought back Francis and Maggie to vote with them, and he got them to give him the shots in the dark for him to play the extra vote, not Maggie play the extra vote. He was impressive what he was able to accomplish. It's just in the day, Zach outwitted him. And honorary shout out to the other Drew, the true Drew. Getting that challenge card is a huge favor that's going to help him move in the game. I hope he holds on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan, who's your last point going to?
My 1 point is Francis. Even though they cast the vote the wrong way, I think that in this episode it really like showed like me how they can maneuver socially. They said that they were approached by Savannah and Zach. There is a clip of them talking to Drew. They're obviously tight with the original Blue. And I think after casting the vote, you can see Francis immediately trying to repair that relationship with Savannah, like apologizing, saying, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that if Francis can get back in the good graces and if they don't have to go to tribal again, that would be good for them. But you can tell everyone loves them. So it's a good place to be.
Yeah, I was originally between a couple people for my last point, namely Maggie, Francis, and then a couple people from Blue. But I think I ultimately landed also, similar to Steven, I landed on Eleanor for my last point. And that's because not only is she willing to flip when she probably would need to avoid a rock draw, but also like nobody on that tribe is throwing out her name, whereas a lot of other names are being thrown out. It seems like she's really clicked with May and Taylor specifically, which I think is really good for her, where they have to go to tribal. It seems like Eleanor to me is playing the sort of game that's not like super game body, but is also like she's very much playing a social game, but like she's playing a socially aware game, which I think is really good. So I'm giving my last point to Eleanor. And those are our Bloomy points for the week. And I think we're pretty close to wrapping up. Steven, do you have any predictions for what's coming next?
2 tribes go to tribal council again.
Ooh, that would be juicy. Which 2
Yeah,
tribes
that
do you
one.
want to see go to tribal?
Yellow and red.
Oh, Steven likes the Blue tribe. We will see next episode. Tune in on Saturday for the next episode, and Steven and I will be back next week at some point with a mystery guest. Casey has pulled a fast one on Steven and I, and has told us that our next podcast episode, usually Steven and I kind of work together to figure out our podcast guests. Next episode, we have no idea who we'll be joined with. Casey has decided to give us a mystery guest, so Steven and I will both be surprised in the moment. But until then, Steven, you up to anything interesting in the LRG universe?
My to-do list for tomorrow is to watch Survivor Pennsylvania episode 2. So I'm very excited for that, but there's a lot of other shows that are out that are premiering. Stranded just dropped. There's CBS Survivor's running. Australian Survivor is a monster in and of itself. There's no lack of content in this world.
And Jordan, what are you up to in the LRG world?
Nothing. Planning Surviving Bloomington.
That's not true. Jordan is on Survivor Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah, I'm not actively doing anything. I'm just watching myself be embarrassing on TV.
And those episodes, when does the next episode of that air?
Those come out Sundays at 8 p.m.
There you go. So episode 2 aired last night. Episode 3 will air next Sunday, day after episode 5 of Surviving Bloomington. And Steven and I will see you in a week or so. And until then, watch Survivor 48 and remember to stan all the people that I like in all of the Survivor shows, because that's what matters, is standing the people that I like. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much. And Jordan, Steven, as always, thanks for being here.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me. Bye, y'all.